So in this video, we're going to look at why individuals in society, such as myself and yourself, which should be interested in seeing what's happening with GDP, unemployment, and inflation. Let's dive in. So in this video, I'm going to highlight some of the values of GDP, unemployment, and inflation in making your decisions. And part of it is if you wanted to invest in the stock market to try to have an idea of what industries are going to be doing better or not. And otherwise, you could also think about it in the terms of you're about to buy a house and you want to know, do I want to have a fixed interest rate or a variable interest rate? So let's think of the stock market first. To determine whether a company will be profitable or not in the future, you have to look at what's happening in the economy. So to look at that, there's many things you should consider, but GDP is going to tell you whether the economy is booming, whether we're plateauing, or whether we're falling into a recession. And that's going to have a big incidence on unemployment, but also on spending of firms. So obviously, if we're in a boom phase, a lot of firms will be growing, and we'll have a situation where the value of those stocks are also growing. But if we're in a recession, it doesn't mean that we should sell everything off and there's nothing that's going to be of value. Think about in a recession, what do people buy more of that they buy less of when things are going well? So if you're thinking about inferior products, those things are being purchased more when we're in a recession. So whether it's cup of noodles or other things that are cheaper to buy, bus rides, instead of using your own car or limo or helicopter to get around, are cheaper alternatives to other products, and those things will be purchased more when we're going through a recession. So you can have an idea of which businesses will grow, will do well, if the economy is not doing so well. With unemployment and inflation, you have a sense of what's to be expected. So unemployment sometimes drives interest rates, which have an influence on inflation. But on its own, unemployment, you could think about if people are losing their jobs, how are they consuming and whatnot. But when I think about inflation, I look at that a lot to determine whether I want to have a variable or a fixed interest rate. I look at other things as well. So I'll give you guys two kind of stories here. If you think about the world after the pandemic, well, after the pandemic, we had an increase in the price of certain goods just because there was so restricted output. And then the economy started opening up again. So those prices should have adjusted downwards. Well, what happened in that time period is that the war broke out in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, and it led to supply chain issues. And through those supply chain issues, some goods were harder to access, which drove up the price of those goods. So in this period of time, when I saw all of this happening, I was expecting inflation rates to go up. And I knew that as inflation rates would go up, to fight that, the central banks would have to increase the interest rates. And when they increase the bank rate, it has influence on mortgage rates and all the other rates in the economy. Therefore, when I saw that happening, I called up a friend who is a mortgage broker and I told him, you should switch all of your clients to fixed interest rates, because right now the variable is cheaper than the fixed, but the fix is going to start going up. Okay, I could foresee that by looking at all of these trends in the economy, what was going to happen to the price level. That's the biggest thing that's going to have an influence on interest rates, because as the price level goes up, they're going to fight it with higher interest rates, and when the price level is going down, it's the opposite. If we're going through a recession, they're going to try to lower interest rates to stimulate the economy. And then afterwards, later on, after a few years of really high inflation rates accompanied by really high interest rates, I had friends that were buying a house and they were wondering if they should have fixed or flexible or variable. And I told them you should get variable interest rate. And The guy didn't really want to because he preferred to have the stability, this idea of having same interest rates all the way through. But I argued that the reason why interest rates were high was because we had really high inflation rates, and looking at the recent reports, we could see that inflation rates were going down. Therefore, I was expecting interest rates to fall. And as a matter of fact, from the moment that I told him that to now, this is just half a year later, interest rates have fallen about 2.5%. So what seemed to be as maybe 0.5% more at first would have been 2% less for the most of his term, unless something happens which brings up interest rates in the future. So you have to be able to see what's going on to GDP and then to the price level to have a sense of what's going to happen to interest rates, to understand whether you should be on fixed or variable and what's to come in the economy. So hopefully you could kind of start seeing the use behind all of these metrics, so that when you learn how to calculate them and you learn to read newspapers that kind of discuss it and understand the implications, it's just going to make it all more interesting. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you in the next one. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real life examples. Have a good day.